Howdy again everyone, and today I'm checking out the Zeiss Batis 40mm f2. I'm gonna review it to smithereens. Doesn't it look nice there? What a gorgeous lens, although that rubber focus ring is a bit of a dust magnet. It's an autofocus full frame lens for Sony E-mount cameras, and at $1,300 US or £1,100 in the UK, it is very expensive, so I'm expecting this thing to shoot fireworks out of its lens mount and make cups of tea for me while I'm writing this review. It had better be good, is what I'm saying. I am a secret admirer of that 40mm focal length on a full-frame camera. It's a slightly wide angle, but your field of view is still tight enough to get you a nice little emphasis on your subject. f2 is not the brightest maximum aperture out there, but it's certainly helpful for shooting in darker situations and getting out of focus backgrounds in your images. The build quality of this thing is, as you'd expect, wonderful. It's metallic, it feels like it's carved out of granite, and it looks good too. It's advertised as being properly weather sealed, including a thin gasket around the rear lens mount. It's a simple lens to control really, having just a focus ring and a focus limiter switch. The focus ring feels lovely and turns incredibly smoothly, and it works with a focus motor to give you a lot of precision in use. Unfortunately, as you can see here, the lens does suffer from considerable focus breathing. That'll be annoying for video makers. The lens's autofocus motor works silently, accurately, and quickly. As is often the case on Sony cameras, it works a little faster in autofocus continuous mode. Above the focus ring is a smart little OLED display to show you where you're focused. Those things are my favourite gimmicks, although admittedly it could be genuinely useful when shooting in the dark and trying to focus to infinity. If you switch the lens to manual focus and keep turning the ring in either direction, you can access some basic options for that display too, switching it from metric to imperial measurements, or setting it to be turned off altogether, or for it just to turn on while manually focusing. The lens comes with a plastic hood. Why not metal at this price? And its filter thread size is 67mm. It does not feature image stabilization. Overall, the build quality of this lens and its functionality are all gorgeous, although video makers will be a bit disappointed by that focus breathing. Okay, let's move on and look at image quality now. I'll start by testing the lens on a full frame camera, my lovely Sony a7R III. In-camera corrections are turned on. At f2, in the middle of the image, we see plenty of sharpness, but contrast is a little low, and we're also catching some slight magenta colour fringing. The image corners are slightly softer, but still quite good. They look just as sharp at f2.8, but image quality back in the middle now looks much cleaner and sharper. Stop down to f4 for perfection in the middle of the image, and also a big improvement in the image corners, which now look almost perfect. The lens stays this sharp down to f11, where a little softness from diffraction is beginning to creep in. Overall, this is a very sharp lens, but considering its enormous price, I was hoping for a little more contrast and slightly sharper corners at f2. At $1,300, we really should be expecting complete perfection here. Alright, let's mount it onto an aps-c camera now, my 24MP Sony a5100. At f2, it's the same story in the middle of the image really, plenty of sharpness, slightly low contrast, and the colour fringing there is emphasised a little more by the extra density of the smaller aps-c sensor. That extra density also causes problems in the image corners, where the lens can no longer keep up with demand, looking noticeably soft. f2.8 looks marginally sharper in the corners, but excellent back in the middle of the image. f4 looks absolutely perfect in the middle, and just like on full frame, the corners now greatly improve, looking virtually as sharp, and f5.6 looks razor sharp in the corners, albeit with just the tiniest hint of colour fringing on contrasting edges if you're really pixel peeping to the max. Stop down all the way to f11 or darker, and the image begins to soften a little again due to diffraction. So, as you can see, the lens's image quality deteriorates a little on the aps-c sensor at the brightest apertures. Crop sensor shooters, I think, should find other ways to spend $1,300. Okay, let's turn off in-camera corrections and look at distortion and vignetting now on a full-frame camera. The lens essentially projects no distortion at all here, which is great. At f2, the image corners are certainly a bit dark, but that vignetting falls quite gently across the image frame, so it's not terribly noticeable. Stop down to f2.8 or f4 for even illumination. I have to say, this is one of the few lenses for mirrorless cameras nowadays that I'd actually be happy shooting with without using corrections. Might as well leave them on anyway, but that's comforting to know for people who like to shoot in RAW. This lens can focus down to 24 centimeters, which is a fantastic bonus feature for shooting smaller subjects. At f2, sharpness is holding out fairly well, although color fringing and lower contrast still rear their ugly heads. f2.8 looks about the same, but f4 now looks excellent. Let's see how well the lens works against bright lights now. It is a performance on the good side of average here. Flaring is visible, but it's not too heavy or opaque. And while we're working in the dark, let's see about the lens's chroma levels. Great news here, bright points of light in the corners of your images show no chroma smearing at all. That's encouraging for nighttime photography. Let's zoom out and look for sunstars. Less luck here, I'm afraid. Only at f11 or f16 do the mildest of sunstars make an appearance. Now, let's take a look at the quality of this lens's bokeh. Slightly disappointing here. At f2, we sometimes do see a bit of busyness and slight colourful outlining in out-of-focus backgrounds. It's not horrifying, but also not great. Stop down to f2.8 and those backgrounds look smoother, but of course not as out of focus anymore. And finally, related to bokeh, let's take a look at longitudinal chromatic aberration. At f2, as you can see, it's pretty strong here. f2.8 is about the same, although at f4 it is reduced, and finally at f5.6 it is gone. Overall then, well, build quality, beautiful. The Batis 40mm f2 is really a nice lens to handle, and the image quality, well, if this lens cost £500 or £600 or so, then I'd be pretty happy, but considering the lens's actual price, it's a disappointment. Image quality isn't as punchy as it should be at f2, and there are issues with the lens's bokeh as well, including longitudinal chromatic aberration. It has some nice advantages, like awesome image quality when the aperture is topped down, no chroma and no distortion. It is actually a nice enough lens, it's just not worth $1,300 unless you're really itching for that gorgeous metal lens body. Well, I'm starting to sound like a broken record with these Zeiss lens reviews, aren't I? Maybe I should just read the same conclusion for each one, just changing the focal length. Honestly, they really are lovely lenses, but those prices... Well, thankfully, something that doesn't cost the earth is supporting this channel on Patreon, of course. I love making these reviews for everyone, but they do take a lot of time and expense. Thankfully, my Patreon supporters make a huge difference, and I'd like to thank them with all kinds of bonus content and exclusive videos every week. Check it out, and ciao for now.